Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Neon. We're going to talk about Square Enix again. There's a rumor that Sony could possibly buy Square Enix, and that the reason they sold off their Western games division was to trim the company down to give Sony what's actually valuable to them, which is, you know, Final Fantasy and Secret of Mana and Kingdom Hearts and those Japanese IP. This would explain a lot. This would kind of be the unified theory of everything, that Square is slimming down to be acquired by Sony. We know they have a really good relationship with Sony, going back to the PlayStation 1, and a lot of their games debut on Sony consoles before they go to other platforms. A lot of cases, they wind up being, you know, Sony exclusives. So it makes sense. Now, the problem with this is you thought the censorship was bad before. Sony's video game division, the PlayStation division, is very, very censor happy. And this would actually kind of explain this Square Enix job listing for their new ethics department, confirming that they're going to focus on discriminatory, prejudicial, or offensive content as they get ready to maybe possibly get absorbed into Sony. So let's talk about this before we get into it any further. Please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, guys. Over 267,000 subs. Thank you so much for the support. We do talk about video games somewhat. We're not a video game news channel per se, but we do talk about some of the bigger happenings going on. A lot of it having to do with the culture wars or with censorship. And, you know, Square's been doing some weird stuff lately, very unsquare-like. And, you know, part of that I think you can trace back to their US headquarters being in LA. And that is kind of the culture, right? But Square has been in a weird place. Like, they just keep churning out Final Fantasy remakes, and every once in a while we get a new game. Now, Final Fantasy 14 has done very, very well for them. And they tried doing the AAA Western game thing, and it did not work out very well for them. Now, they do have a bunch of IP from various acquisitions. I think they bought Taito, I think, at one point. But they bought Eidos. They got Tomb Raider. They have Deus Ex. They have, you know, a lot of franchises. Legacy of Kain, which I actually would have at one point in time loved to have seen another Legacy of Kain game. But they sold all those Western, quote unquote, Western IP off to Embracer Group, which is this company going around gobbling up IP. They bought Dark Horse Comics. They're buying some other things, and they bought all the Western stuff off of Square. So if you go back again, you know, got to give credit to Bounding in the Comics. If you go back over the last couple months, you'll see stories that sort of lead us here. So we have Yosuke Matsuda saying that, you know, if Japanese developers imitate Western games, they will not be able to produce good ones. And that seemed to be a precursor to them dumping their Western games. And this was back in April. And then again, this job listing for this ethics department person or people to come in and clean up the tits, you know. So we'll see what happens. But now it all seems to be leading to Square being absorbed by Sony. And we know that Sony and Microsoft are scrambling, trying to buy what's left of the video game industry. You know, Microsoft is buying Activision Blizzard, and Sony bought Bungie earlier in the year. They bought Bungie for $3.6 billion. So yeah, they totally could buy Square. It actually makes sense that they would. That being said, I think it's RIP Square, because Square to be honest, Square has not been Square since they merged with Enix. And both of those companies were good. Squaresoft and Enix were both very good companies producing very good games. But since the merger, you know, the quality has been very hit or miss. And, you know, I miss when Square used to put out a bunch of new franchises, a bunch of new games. They would take chances. And now they just don't take chances. It's like every RPG we put out is some flavor of Final Fantasy, even if it doesn't fit Final Fantasy per se. It's got to be a Final Fantasy game, right? So this is coming from Inverse. The recent trend of billion-dollar video game company acquisitions doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. With that in mind, Sony is supposedly gearing up to purchase Square Enix, the publisher behind Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and Kingdom Hearts. This would be yet another groundbreaking sale, especially after Embracer bought all of Square Enix's North American studios and IP. Yeah, and they had a disaster with Marvel The Marvel games, the Avengers game did very, very poorly. That was the one where they put Ms. Marvel front and center. And I think in hindsight, people are going to look back at that and be like, that was the moment Square decided to nope out of Western games. It was a huge failure. It had so much potential. Now, the unfortunate thing, and I said this in a previous video, is that Guardians of the Galaxy also had poor sales. I don't know what the sales were compared to the Marvel game, but Guardians of the Galaxy was actually very, very good. It was a good game. I was watching Squid King play it, and I'm like, damn, this is actually pretty good. What the hell happened? And they just decided to throw their hands up in the air and be like, yep, we're scraping Western games off the bottom of our shoes, right? They've talked to some people in the industry. They said it's not outlandish. No, it's not outlandish at all. It makes complete sense that they're prepping for something. And Sony doesn't want their Western IP. They only want the Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts and Dragon Quest. Kind of Funny CEO Greg Miller said he'd heard from multiple different sources that Sony was in talks to purchase Square Enix. It's unclear if this will turn out to be true, but people think it's possible. On Tuesday, May 10th at 2 a.m. Eastern, Sony will release its financial results for the past fiscal year, which could be the perfect time to reveal the acquisition of Square Enix. So far, as of recording this video, it hasn't happened. There isn't much of a need for Square Enix to sell to Sony. The deal certainly isn't out of the question. Square Enix has no reason to sell itself at the moment, as the company has been profitable for years and years now and sits on well over $1 billion in cash on hand, citing games as Final Fantasy XIV as major contributors to the company's success. Now, here's where the other shoe drops, though. This despite recent releases such as Marvel's Avengers and Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, both of which failed to meet financial expectations for Square Enix. Though now that the publisher has sold the developer of those games, Crystal Dynamics, to Embracer, Square can recoup some of the costs. Sony acquiring Square Enix would certainly make a lot of sense, especially given that both companies are based in Japan. On paper, Square Enix is looking like a great fit for Sony, which could use its home field advantage as a Japanese company in possible M&A mergers and acquisitions. Yet, Sony has pretty much given up on PlayStation in Japan. They shut down the Japan studio. And Square Enix, despite a lot of the controversy and shit going on around the company over the last couple of years, some of the decisions, and, I'm not nearly as big of a Square fan as I used to be a massive Square fan. I love Final Fantasy games. I loved everything. I want a Threads of Fate re-release, Square. Where's that one? But, they're still well respected in Japan, and it just seems like Sony hasn't completely given up on their home turf yet. I mean, they bought Crunchyroll, so they basically could own anime or own streaming rights to anime worldwide and dominate there. And I could see them buying Square. I mean, they got to do something because Microsoft is ramping it up with buying the carcass of Activision Blizzard, but it totally makes sense. Now, again, I don't think that's going to fix Square. And here's where I'm torn on Sony, because Sony, when it comes to TVs and movies, that division, I don't know if it's Amy Pascal or who, but they seem like they're getting their shit together. I mean, they walked back Ghostbusters 2016, gave us Ghostbusters Afterlife, which I personally thought was very good. Some people didn't like it. I thought it was pretty good. And they're using that as a springboard for more classic Ghostbusters movies. They're doing the sequel to Afterlife for sure. They've given us Cobra Kai. They gave us Spider-Man No Way Home, which was like a love letter to the, 90s and 2000s Spider-Man movies, Sony movies. So they seem to have a better idea of what fans want. That's on the movie side of things. On the video game side of things, PlayStation is woke as fuck. They really are. I just don't understand what the hell is going on there. We have a PS5. We were lucky enough to get one the month it came out, and that's because Geeky had a very quick mouse finger. She was able to grab one from Target because they actually started listing them on the site at like 4 or 5 hours before they were supposed to, and she grabbed one. And I gotta tell you, the graphics are pretty, and some of the games are okay. But I'm not completely floored. It just looks like a slightly better PS4. And I'm not really personally, I'm not into most of the AAA Western games that are coming out right now. I definitely like old school games, retro games, JRPGs, quirky indie games, and I actually wind up playing the Switch more than I play anything else, if I have time to play games. I don't have a lot of time these days, but PS5 is not something I really go out of my way to play. It's like, yeah, that was okay. It's all right. I mean, so many people are upset that they can't get one. I'm like, you're not really missing much, I'm going to be honest. But yeah, they said Sony makes large purchases. They bought Bungie for $3.6 billion. And then Microsoft bought Activision for $68.7 billion. But if this happens, if it does happen, this absolutely explains everything going on right now. Like, they've been in talks. They're like, Sony is like, yeah, we don't want Tomb Raider. We don't want Deus Ex. Just scrape it off the bottom of your shoe. We want Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and Kingdom Hearts. And if you can bring that over here, you got a deal. So I'm going to wrap it up. Please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, guys. We'll talk later.